Do you need to have a superpower to be an effective CEO? What happens if you don't feel you actually have that kind of super skill? How can you build a pan-continental business with zero experience? And as you do that, empower your managers to lead effectively. This is what I explore today with Rebecca Harrison. Rebecca has spent the last decade building the African Management Institute, Africa's leading provider of business and management learning. It supports over 37,000 businesses in 39 African countries, has impacted over 1.5 million livelihoods, and contributed over 130 million into the African economy. So in this conversation, we're going to look at why Rebecca is so impact driven and what caused her to pursue that impact business in a sector and a market she'd never really had much experience in. And what did she have to learn the hard way on that journey? We also look at this question of superpowers, why she doesn't at least initially think she has a particular superpower, what she says is important instead, and then a reframe that I give her that helps us see things a little bit differently. And then finally, we look at 3 hard-won tips that Rebecca wants to share around building effective middle management, which is such a key issue, and how to do this in a hierarchical culture, which often African markets and actually many other markets around the world will actually have as a default assumption, the assumption that obedience to your leader is better than ownership of the task. And we really get into how she has achieved that in her own business, as well as teaching her own clients how to do that. So this is a great conversation. I love Rebecca's heart, her mission, and the impact she's made and the journey she's on. Enjoy this conversation with Rebecca Harrison. Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. I'm Richard Metcalf, founder of X Quadrant, and my mission is to help the world's top CEOs and entrepreneurs shift from incremental to exponential progress and create a huge positive impact on our world. Now, that requires you to reinvent yourself and transform your business. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an impact multiplier CEO. Hi, Rebecca, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Richard. Great to be here.
So we go back a long way. I think we first met 25 years ago when you were a hotshot journalist and I was doing who knows what. And we kind of lost touch over the years. And then 25 years later, we kind of reconnect. And you have been spending the last decade building the African Management Institute, AMI. And it looks like it's been absolutely amazing ride. So I'm really looking forward to getting into what that journey's been. Before we start, do you want to just explain what is AMI and where now 10 years in, what's the scale of what you've been able to create?
Yeah, thanks so much, Richard. And thanks for having me. It's great to be here. So AMI stands for African Management Institute. We are an edtech scale-up based in Africa, as you can probably figure out from the name. We leverage technology to deliver workplace learning to Africa's ambitious companies and talent. So training sometimes kind of doesn't sound as exciting and impactful about as what we do. So we think more of ourselves as a kind of learning and business growth company. We've been around for about 10 years, as you said. We've worked with businesses, now about 37,000 businesses across Africa in pretty much every country in Africa now. We've got team based in about 8 countries, a team of about 130. And we've had a ton of impact. Reaching 37,000 companies. That's generated. We've estimated it added about $130 million to Africa's economies and impacted about 1.5 million livelihoods. So we're mission driven, and we really believe that by building businesses, we're driving prosperity, creating jobs, improving livelihoods across the continent. So yeah, that's who we are and what we do.
Yeah, it's amazing. You've expanded into 39 different countries, 1.5 million. You kind of rushed over it, right? But if you stop and think 1.5 million people have had their lives impacted because of this journey that's been only actually a decade, right? Not actually that long in many ways. And yet you've had this impact. And so it's really exciting work that you've been doing. So kind of perhaps take us back just at the very start. What was it that got you to kind of leave your high-flying world of journalism and get stuck into probably, Africa's probably not the easiest place to do business, I suspect. It's probably a huge learning curve. What was it that was like, made you go, that's my mission, that's what I'm going to do, and I'm all in?
Yeah. I love telling this story, and it's funny how something that now seems so blindingly obvious, obviously took a bit of time to evolve. But I don't know. I certainly don't know if I was high flying or hotshot journalist, but I was a journalist, and I had been posted to Johannesburg. So I think when we met, I was living in Paris. I was sent to Johannesburg by Reuters. I was working with Reuters News for about a decade before this, and I thought, in a slightly naive kind of way, I thought that I would be sent to Africa to write about, poverty, HIV, human rights, all of these good things. And I got there and my editor said, no, we want you to write about technology and companies and markets. And you can imagine, like, my heart sank. I had imagined myself as this kind of swashbuckling journalist, and here I was, having been told I had to write about technology and markets. So I wasn't initially all that enthusiastic about this, but I really quickly realized this was kind of, I'll betray my age, but this was kind of mid-2000s, and it was a moment when mobile technology was sweeping across Africa really, really rapidly. And I could see in front of me, how ordinary people were using mobile phones to create mini businesses, to generate livelihoods for themselves and their families, to access all sorts of things, whether healthcare, education, whatever it was. And it suddenly became obvious, mobile tech was going to change people's lives in a way that, traditional aid and development and all the issues I thought that I would be writing about really had failed to do. And so I got really excited about this kind of opportunity and moment in time. And I'd always had this vague idea in the back of my brain that one day I would start a business. So I took the leap and actually went to business school first. So it was a pretty safe mini leap to start off with. Went to business school, met my co-founder, and basically I was looking for a problem to solve where technology could democratize access to something. And my business partner was running the business school that I went to, and he was fascinated by the idea of how could you make business education and support much more accessible. And so we kind of came together around a lot of different whiteboards, kind of thinking about, well, how could we kind of marry these two ideas? How could we use technology to bring really practical business growth, business learning, business tools to, eventually hundreds of thousands, millions of people across the continent? I'll pause there.
Amazing. Yeah. So how did you kind of get started? Or at least I'm sure there was a phase of exploration and messing around, for want of a better word, right? Trying to figure things out. But what were kind of some of the major breakthroughs that then allowed you to kind of really start to scale up and get serious about it?
Yeah, I often say that, I think the two necessary ingredients for an entrepreneur are naivety and stubbornness. Or you can kind of frame those a bit more positively as optimism and grit. But I think honestly, it's like naivety. And I was hopelessly naive about what it would take to build this, right? I think most entrepreneurs are. If you knew what it would take, I don't know if anyone would actually start a business if you really knew what it would take. And to do it frankly, to do it in a market that I didn't know, in a sector I wasn't from. I'm not even a techie, I'm a non-technical founder. I mean, there were so many things wrong with this idea. The only thing that was right, I think, was the purpose and the intent behind it. So when we first started, we thought that because all founders like to have we're the X of X, we were like, we will be the Coursera for Africa. We thought that we would just put online courses onto the internet and magically, millions of people across Africa would pay us for them and that they would have an impact in their business. Funnily enough, and not so funnily enough, that failed quite spectacularly. We actually got about 10,000 people onto the platform quite quickly, and there was a lot of interest. But I mean, payment, we were working on a freemium model. Upgrades were like barely double digit. It was embarrassingly bad. So we pivoted pretty quickly. We got a bit of traction working directly with bigger businesses to train their teams, kind of corporate learning. But it was really tough. I mean, there was no culture really of digital learning in most of the markets. But South Africa there was. By then we had shifted to Kenya. as our base. And we were an unknown brand with, not really a proven product, and no one was paying for anything on the internet either. So there were all these kind of challenges we hadn't really foreseen. Then we stumbled on the business model that has really driven a lot of our growth, which is working with large development agencies to support several hundred, now thousands of smaller businesses at the same time. So now a large part of our business is really working with development actors where, they have a goal around a certain kind of segment of business they want to support, and we're able to roll out a program at scale. So, but that, like, finding that initial business model, figuring out how we have impact, and then how we build a sustainable business from having that impact. Those two things, I would say, it took us a good 5 years to figure out.
So what I'm hearing really, well, the key thing there was figuring out who was actually going to pay, right? Was it the end users? Was it large corporates? Was it development players? That sounds like a key part of what you were trying to figure out, right? The core business model. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly. The core business model and the impact model. So, like, working out, like, how are we going to deliver practical, locally relevant, scalable tools and supports in a way that was actually going to make a difference. We didn't want to do it just for the sake of it. We started from a place of, we want to build businesses across the continent. And then on the other side, at the same time, trying to figure out, well, what's the payment model? We realized pretty quickly that the people paying were probably not going to be the immediate end user. There would be some kind of client paying, whether that's a corporate or a development agency or organization.
Have you ever had a conflict between the kind of like the commercial kind of drivers of, like, this is how we can make money, and that impact agenda? Or has it always gone together because it's always been in this field of management education? So kind of you didn't have to think too much about that.
Yeah, I'm often asked that, but I don't know. I think because we've built AMI so much around a kind of a purpose and a mission, our business model is very closely aligned to our impact model. So when we make money when we're having impact. And I often say to my team, actually, that impact is our product. It's what we're selling to our clients. So if we're selling to a business that wants to strengthen its team, its employees, and help them to perform more effectively, the business might call that ROI, right? So, but if you're working with a development agency that wants to drive job creation outcomes among small businesses in the dairy sector in 3 East African countries, they would just call that impact outcomes. But either way, that your client is essentially buying from you performance or improved outcomes. And so I feel really fortunate that, like, we don't really have to make that trade-off, because if we're doing our job well, we get paid for it, our clients renew, our business grows. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's a great point, because when I'm working with CEOs and entrepreneurs around their own business vision and their sense of purpose, I really say, like, these things should align, because if actually the main driver, if you want to inspire people, you have to have actually an impact KPI, I call it. You have to, because otherwise, I mean, you might get out of bed possibly for you because you're a shareholder, possibly. At some point, probably not, actually. And certainly most of your team are not going to get out of bed for that. So actually, you do want to get clear on the impact you want to make. And if the impact is not actually related to your core business, you have a problem. Like, they're always going to be sub-optimizing. And so I think I would encourage people to say, like, what is it? Like, if you make cheese, then what is it about making cheese that gets you out of bed, right? And like, what is it? Is it literally the product? Is it the way you make the product, or whatever, right? But the actual, the core of the business has to be its own reward in some ways, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I've heard, I didn't coin this phrase, but I really like it. A mentor once told me, fall in love with the problem, not the solution, which I think is just a great way to think about business building when you're purpose driven. Is, I didn't set out to build a business for the sake of building a business. I love business building, so I do, that is part of it for me. But we set out to support, to enable, ambitious businesses across Africa to thrive through practical tools and training. That is our vision. That's our mission. We want to see strong businesses that create jobs, Yeah. So that has to, that has to be at the core of what we do. And we may change what we do in order to further that mission, rather than the other way around. When you fall in love with your solution, not the problem, then it's easy to lose your way or to get stuck on something that isn't solving the problem in the first place.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one of my clients runs $100 million business, and as we worked together, he realized that at the start, he really inspired his team and himself. And over time, the kind of money had kind of crept in, and he realized he was talking more about the financial goals than about the true impact and heart behind his business. Another CEO entrepreneur of about $50 million business I was working with, I said, basically, when I asked him about his vision, it was basically like sell the business in 2 years. And I was like, okay, fine, but like that's like my mental model was you're a pirate, on the open seas, and you've got this big treasure, hoard in your boat, and you got to get back to port to spend it. But the actual journey is miserable. You've got like the sea in your face, and you're seasick, and you're hating the journey. Versus, I said, what about if you actually create another image, which is, there is some gold in this boat, but actually there's, you're enjoying the lash of the sea and the sea air and the salt, and actually you love being at sea. And therefore, what is it about the journey that would get you excited, like even if there was no end? And when I actually got him to really think about that, he found a purpose within his business and within what he was doing that allowed him to actually get excited for the business and not just for the sale.
I love that. I love that because I think particularly as founders, and if you have raised VC and there's always this exit horizon or however you're thinking about it, there can be this kind of constant sense of delayed gratification, like we're always building towards something and the next thing and the next, whether it's the next annual set of annual targets or the next 3 to 5 year strategy or your exit strategy, or whatever it is. And it's so easy to get, I think as entrepreneurs, you tend to be pretty goal oriented, right? And pretty driven, which is a good thing. But I think it's so important what you just said about that image is going to stick with me of the pirate on the seas. But, what you just said about the journey, like it's really, we're missing the fun and missing so much of the value if you don't kind of take in what you're doing along the way, which is kind of building value for all of your stakeholders, hopefully creating an environment of human flourishing for your team, putting a great product out there, changing how your sector maybe works, all of these things. As you say, that's part of the journey.
So let's change gears a little bit. One of the questions I asked you before a couple of weeks ago was around what you think your superpower is, what where you think your genius zone is, where you shine. And you had a really interesting response. You said to me, I don't really think I have a superpower. I think it'd be really interesting to expand on that. So tell me what was going on when I said that and why you kind of said, I'm not sure that's really my thing. I don't have a superpower. It's a common phrase, right, in business leadership.
Yeah, I think it's not just false modesty. I'm not. I think I can do lots of things, but I don't. I don't find it a super helpful mental model because I think we can get caught up on having to be brilliant at this one thing. And I genuinely, particularly as a founder CEO, I think the one thing that you can do better than it, there's two things you can do better than anyone else. One is that you care more than anyone else really about whether the business is growing and whether you're achieving your mission and purpose. And as much as you can hire fabulous team members and colleagues and fellow kind of journeymen and women along the way, no one else is going to care quite as much as you. So, and that means that you will always be able to connect dots and drive progress more than anyone else. So I guess, and that, I guess that doesn't really feel like something you put a cape on and woohoo, I'm a superhero to do that. But I think in order to be able to do that, you need to have kind of range and breadth and need to be able to dive into a lot of different things. So, I'm absolutely a generalist. I always joke with my team that we have to keep AMI going because I don't think I'd be able to get a job anywhere else. I have no specialism. I just really care more about the mission and the purpose of AMI than anyone else, apart from my co-founder, of course. But because I'm in the CEO seat, I'm able to drive that progress better than anyone else and see how do you connect those dots. How can we unblock, kind of dismantle obstacles, move things forward? I think that's the way that a founder CEO can be most useful. So I guess that's my superpower somehow, unblocking and driving forward and connecting dots. I don't know what the superpower cape would be for that.
Well, actually, two things come to mind there. Actually, so first of all, there is in my book, I have a chapter called "Are You Superman or Batman?" And originally, I was like, because basically, I originally thought, well, you want to be Superman and not Batman because Superman's like the real deal. He's like authentically, like that's who he is, and Batman kind of like, assembles this personality, right? He kind of builds his gear. But then I thought the other way around. Well, actually, it should be Batman and not Superman because Batman actually kind of creates himself, and like levels up, where Superman actually dials himself down and becomes Clark Kent and kind of melts into the background for half the time. So I actually realized you could probably be both. So I think almost this conversation is, perhaps you're more like a Batman figure where actually you've basically said, this is what I need to create in order to drive this business that I care about. I care about Gotham City or whatever it is, right? And therefore I need my bat cape and my bat suit, and I need to make these things happen to get there. So it's just a different perspective. But I would say when I work with these leaders, CEOs, founder CEOs do create value in very distinct ways. They don't always see it because often it's like it's just who we are, and we think it's normal. So I suppose I really believe what you said. I think it is like being the one that cares the most is like a rocket fuel right inside and really, really matters. And I think that comes out. And I would kind of, as a bit of homework, I'd almost say like go back over the last 6 months or year and write down 3 moments where you feel you added the most value. These 3 specific situations where, you know what, like if I'd just done those 3 things last year, it would have I would have got 80% of the way there anyway, just if I made those 3 movements. And what I find when I would talk to one client, it was like, oh yeah, I'd made these deals, like these 2, another one was, oh, you know what, it was whenever I'm in my zone, I'm inspiring people by my personal kind of credibility and my vision. And it's just those moments where I get to speak and inspire that are the game changers for me. Somebody else, one of my other clients, he's like brain the science of a planet and will, just seize business models, business opportunities, like ecosystems that he could put together that nobody else is even thinking about. And he knows that like when he just comes up with that model, that's his value. So they are different. Each of those are quite different in design. I suspect yours is different as well. So I would encourage you to look for it because when you find it, like you might realize that a lot of the other stuff you do because you care, but it might not be that kind of magic.
Oh, I agree. I don't think it means you need. I don't think caring the most means that you should do everything at all. So there's definitely there's certainly things. For example, I know I'm not good at and I wouldn't do. So I don't think it's the same as saying, oh, I care the most, so I must do everything, or I must be involved in everything. Not at all. I think it's more this momentum, ability to kind of give momentum. And unblock and use your bird's eye view to connect these dots. That I think is where, in general, a kind of a founder CEO can add a huge amount of value. I really like your Batman Superman kind of analogy, though, that because one kind of side of the whole founder kind of mystique and like whole tech bro kind of culture that has always bothered me is this idea of these superheroes that somehow fall out of the sky with this unique set of characteristics and that you're born, you're born that way, which I really think is nonsense, and a bit of a myth. And so I think I prefer maybe the Batman analogy of like taking resources as you come across them and being opportunistic and piecing together what you're good at, your strengths, but also then going out and complementing that with great people, using resources that you've got, networks that you have, kind of using what's there to construct something unique and fantastic and kind of hopefully world changing, I guess. Stretching the Batman analogy, but you know what I mean.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation. This is just a quick interlude to remind you that my book, Making Time for Strategy, is now available. If you want to be less busy and more successful, I highly recommend that you check it out. Why not head over to makingtimeforstrategy.com to find out the details. Now, back to the conversation. Yeah, beautiful. So let's change gears again here, Rebecca. I'd love to speak about how your own journey about building middle management, because I know you said that was a bit of a journey in itself. It was a key layer, right? You've got your executives, then you got to build these middle managers. And I know that you were saying it's ironic because obviously we're all about management, and yet that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. And I know many founders and CEOs who do kind of struggle with the kind of, they spend a lot of time at the executive layer and they're not quite sure how to do that middle layer. So kind of what's your journey been around that, and like what advice would you give, what would be your top 3 tips for other leaders who are thinking about how they get more out of their middle layer?
Yeah. It's a great question, and I often joke that management is literally our middle name, and yet still took us a while to figure out how to do it. It's much easier to teach, it turns out, than to actually practice. So we have loads of great programs on management, but it took us a while to learn how to do it ourselves. I think so. 3 tips. I think one is that really, and we encourage our clients with this as well, is to develop a language around what management means in your organization. And I think, I think for early stage companies, this is perhaps less important, but pretty quickly, as you start to think about kind of culture and building good culture, you need that kind of language around management. So we really early on just made this kind of had a separate little onboarding track for managers with this simple 1-pager on what does it mean to be a manager at AMI, which sounds so simple, but just we realized that there was it's this vague word, right, that we use in so many different ways. And that means quite different things to different people, particularly in a cross-cultural context. So remember, we're an international team working in, we have teams in 9 markets in Africa who all have a different understanding of what management means. So just writing down, if you are a people manager, this is what we expect of you. And so I think going through that, and of course, to get to the 1 page, that took a lot of thinking and I had to distill a lot of ideas. So I think we always encourage our clients to do that, is to really think about, what does management mean to you, and develop a kind of shared language around that and shared understanding of what it looks like. And that can be calibrated to the kind of stage that you are as a business. Obviously, big businesses, have lots of models for this, and smaller businesses can be a little more relaxed about it. Yeah, so that first point is, developing a shared understanding and language around management. The second is, obviously, it's become almost a bit of a cliche to say you kind of hire for culture eats strategy for breakfast, all of these things. Culture's absolutely critical when you're building a company, but particularly even more so for your middle management. And I think we made the mistake of, really focusing on that kind of senior hire and then just kind of letting everyone get on with it. And we realized that we really needed to embed hiring for culture and values into, across the whole organization, but particularly for middle managers. And we realized that when we compromised on that, that has ripple effects very, very quickly through a whole vertical. I mean, you can suddenly look and see, you can have a whole team that suddenly is out of sync with the rest of the organization because you haven't got that kind of the key manager right from a culture perspective.
And what does it mean to hire for culture and values?
Yeah. So I guess first it's being clear about what your values are. I'm sure you talked to your clients at length about this, but we went through quite an extensive process identifying what our values were. We workshopped that with a team a long time ago now, probably 8 or 9 years ago. And then we've kind of built them out over the years to really try and, I guess, codify what do those values mean day to day. So one of our values is, for example, own it. And we found, particularly in our context, where we had a lot of people coming in who were used to a more hierarchical style of organizational style and management, were used to being told what to do and just delivering inputs, basically delivering what they had been told to do, rather than taking ownership for a result or an outcome. And so we made that really one of our core values for, I mean, it's still one of our core values, but really arguably one of the most important. And so really kind of working out, well, what does that mean? That means, when you're asked to do something, you don't stop until you deliver. If you need to, work late to do it, you work late to do it. Just like very, very kind of specific things. And then we basically have taken those values and then worked them into our whole kind of hiring process. So we have hiring questions mapped to each value that go into every interview. We have a kind of scoring mechanism for those. And then we have a final, for anything kind of middle manager and above, we have a final culture interview that myself and my co-founder do, or someone else if we're not available. So yeah, we've been pretty rigorous about culture, particularly from a kind of middle management perspective.
Beautiful. So I think that was two, right? So we've got language and really build out that language and philosophy around middle management. And then, hiring for culture and values. I think really great examples about practical examples around what it means to own it and have the values and have the behaviors and really kind of make it crystal clear for people what that is. What was the third one be?
Yeah. And the third most important, given what we do, is develop your managers, which sounds so obvious, but yet so many people still fail to do it. And I speak to a client almost every week who says, it's always the same. We have we have really good technical people who we promoted, and now they're managing a team, but they're not doing so well. And we realize, that's because they don't know how to manage people, and again, others have talked about this at length, I'm sure, and I'm sure you work on this with your clients. But, just because people are good at their job doesn't mean that they're good at getting other people to do their jobs. Someone can deliver results, but can you get results to other people? It's a really different skill. And so really being intentional about developing those specific skills, and that not everyone needs to be on that track. It's not right for everyone to manage other people.
It's a great point. I remember one of the earlier guests on the podcast actually saying, he was actually the Ben Page, the chief executive of Mori, Ipsos, I think it's called now, Ipsos, globally. And he said that when they did research on managers and leaders, he said, everyone always says the same thing. It's just that the difference is the good ones actually do the stuff. They actually have one-to-ones with their team. And it's they actually develop their leaders. They actually coach rather than micromanage, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really interesting that was really came out in the data when they looked at it.
So key. In fact, our whole kind of learning methodology, not to get into too much detail, but most management training or most kind of workplace learning fails because it starts with this kind of, it starts with a framework or a concept or an idea or a piece of knowledge, and it fails to kind of translate into what you actually do day in, day out, those kind of micro behaviors. That like having a regular one-on-one with your team. So what we actually did when we realized that, so much billions of dollars just in Africa every year is wasted on kind of obsolete training that doesn't work. We said, well, let's start with the behavior, or even better, the business practice in a small business. So we started by mapping out and looking at the evidence, what actually drives small business growth for small businesses and what drives good employee and manager behavior, across kind of, cross-cutting soft skill type, and mapped out what does the evidence say that these are, what have we seen in our experience, and kind of mapped out a set of behaviors and practices, and then work backwards. So
Can you give some examples? So what are those tangible things you focus on?
Yeah, so when we're working with small businesses, we have kind of 5 practice areas around managing money, managing markets and customers, managing people, managing operations, and having a strategy and a planning, basically. And what a typical training program would do is say, I will teach you about cash flow. This is how cash works. This is how cash flows through a business. Here's some kind of a video to watch about it. Now go and now go and manage cash flow in your business. And most people can't make that conceptual behavioral leap from, oh, someone's told me what cash flow is, to what do I do in my business. So we start with, okay, do you or don't you forecast your cash flow every month? Yes or no? There's no middle ground. Yes, you do it every month, or you don't. And if you don't, well, tick, circle that one. That's one you need to work on. And here is a tool that will show you how to forecast cash flow with a little video and then kind of some reminders to do it. So it's focused on those kind of day in, day out. And on the employee side, on the workplace learning side, management side, it might be something like, do you do one-on-ones with your team regularly? Do you have at least say bi-weekly one-on-one with your team? If you don't, circle that. That's something you should be doing. Here is a framework for how you do one-on-ones. We do a kind of a simulation, some workshops, practice doing it. But the focus is on doing those things, not on learning about what it might be like to do a one-on-one one day, or why performance management is important. Those things just don't translate into kind of behavior change. So we start with so to your point on the difference is doing it, 100% like execution every time, right? So let's get executing, let's get doing it immediately.
Beautiful. So tell me about, let's go into the future very briefly as we wrap up here. How do you want AMI to multiply its impact over the next few years? Like, if we're having this call in 3 to 5 years' time, what would you love to be different in how you're operating the business, or what you've achieved?
Yeah, we're really excited about what's ahead. We feel like we're a bit of inflection points with the business where our impact is so clear. We've been able to collect data and tell those stories of how what we do kind of changes businesses so effectively that we're really ready to scale up. And also there's been some changes just in our kind of the particular markets that we're in our corporate market, for example, like COVID. As much as I hate saying there are silver linings to COVID, there were some. And one of them was that it massively accelerated digital adoption across Africa, particularly in urban markets. So where we used to have to, we were building the market for digital learning. We were having to explain to customers why this might be a good thing to consider. Now it's become the default option. So we're really seeing fantastic growth. We've seen kind of almost 100% year-on-year growth on our corporate business. And we've started to be able to reach much greater scale on our kind of SME business. So we're really poised for rapid growth. We're actually raising some external capital. We've been mostly internally funded so far, but raising some external capital now from impact investors, and aiming to scale up the business by about 10x over the next 5 years to be Africa's leading learning company for business. It's exciting.
Yeah, it is. And my favorite question, which I have to ask every guest really, is like, how are you going to need to evolve and level up yourself for you to multiply your impact in accordance with that business? Like, what's your edge and learning curve going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time thinking about this over the last few years as we really, at this inflection point, you start thinking about naturally, what's my role for the next 5 years, and am I the right person to carry this forward? I decided yes. But of course there's a learning curve. And I think for me, what's been big the last few years is I realized that I think I've held myself back previously due to kind of fear of failure and fear of somehow, am I doing this the right way? There's no playbook when you're building a business, but we still yearn for the playbook and kind of feel like, well, am I doing this right? What do other people think? Or and I realized I kind of had a bit of a aha moment over the last few years that really no one knows. We're doing this for the first time. No one has ever built a scaled up digital learning business in Africa before. It doesn't exist. So no one knows how to do it. I probably know better than anyone else at this point because I've been doing it for 10 years. And I've honed the kind of instincts to know not necessarily what's right, but to have a good sense of what might be right and to be able to listen to the market and the kind of market dynamics to be able to then pivot. And so I think for me, really the big learning and it has been to embrace courage, I think, to grow, and to give up this idea of, it's not really about me and whether I do it well, or me and my personal performance and, oh, what if I mess it up? And I think once you can let go of that, actually you're freed up to take more risks, to think bigger, to do what the market is telling you, not what you think that maybe you should be doing because some, business professor said that's the way it should be done. So I don't know if that's really a question.
Well, it's fascinating looking at that shift. So I guess I'd ask it in other ways. Yeah. So like, given that, right, given how you realize you don't have to follow somebody else's playbook, what might be like one little tweak that you might need to kind of focus on? Because normally we do what made us successful last year and not what's going to make us successful next year. And so the Rebecca who builds this 10x business is going to be different from the Rebecca that got it to here. I'm just going to be wondering what ideas you might have. And you might not have it right now, but I'm kind of curious as to what comes to mind when I say that.
No, and I think that's what I'm trying to get at, I guess, is this sense that I think the shift for me that has allowed us to get to this point has been to say, actually, there is a big opportunity. We're the ones to seize it. So almost having that like a bolder, more courageous kind of approach to the problem we're trying to solve, rather than worrying too much about like, well, is it, what if this doesn't work? What if we're not meant to be doing it like that? How do we do it? Like that's slightly kind of over analytical or kind of maybe second guessing, or honestly, I think just too much fear of failure. That for me has been the big shift that I think will take us into, the next phase. There are a million things we're going to have to learn to get that right day to day, right? I mean, so I need, I'm talking all the time to CEOs who are running bigger companies than me, thinking about, we this year crossed the 100-person mark. We're at 130 people now. I'm a very relationship-driven manager, realizing that, I can't lead by direct relationship anymore. I don't know everyone's name anymore. That's going to take a different kind of style personally, realizing that, we have to scale through process. We can't just scale through grit and hustle and hiring good people. We need to build in kind of replicable processes, those kind of things. So yeah, I think there are a million things to learn, but for me, that core kind of shift is around, giving up your own sense of like, am I doing the right thing? Might I fail? And a real focus on, singular focus on the mission of the business and having the courage to reach, I guess, and to aim high and to build.
Yeah, wholeheartedly. Yeah, definitely a big part of the 10x mindset. So loving hearing you talking about that. Hey, it's been a great conversation. We're probably out of time. So before we go, where can people kind of find out more about you or about AMI?
Yeah, so our website's www.africanmanagers.com. African with an N in the middle, managers.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. Feel free, anyone to reach out and ping me if you think we should be working together or collaborating. I love talking about business building, leadership, Africa, all of those good things. So yeah, I would love to engage.
Perfect. Well, hey, it's been a lot of fun and it's been great to reconnect in this way after 25 years. A quarter of a century, right? Would you believe? So that's a bit less, but it's been great. Anyway, best of luck. Look forward to continuing following along on your journey. And thanks again.
Thanks so much, Richard. It's been an absolute pleasure. Cheers.
Well, that's a wrap. If you received value from this conversation, please do leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. We'd deeply appreciate it. And if you'd like to check out the show notes from this episode, head to xquadrant.com/podcast, where you'll find all the details. Now, finally, when you're in top leadership, who supports and challenges you at a deep level to help you multiply your impact? Discover more about the different ways we can support you at xquadrant.com.